Could you quit work with a £500,000 portfolio and live off dividends forever? At a 4% yield, it sounds almost too easy. £500,000 invested produces £20,000 a year in dividends. That is roughly £1,666 a month. Spreadsheet done, job done, right? Except that number can be brutally wrong. Because the moment you include tax, inflation, dividend cuts, irregular payment dates, and the fact that no dividend yield is guaranteed, you may need hundreds of thousands of pounds more than you first thought. So in this video, I'm going to show you the real UK numbers. How much you would need invested to generate £1,000, £2,000, and £3,000 a month in dividend income. But more importantly, I will show you the 3 mistakes that can quietly leave a dividend retirement plan short of cash just when you need it most. Stay until the end because I am going to give you what I call the sleep at night number. Not the optimistic spreadsheet number, the number that gives you some protection when dividends disappoint, prices rise, and markets have a bad year. Quick disclaimer before we start. This is an educational framework, not personal financial advice. Investments can fall as well as rise. Dividend payments can be cut, and you may get back less than you put in. Right, let's get into it. The first thing to understand is that the starting point for this calculation is not a dividend yield. It is your life. Before you look at a single fund, ETF, or company share, you need to know what you actually want your money to pay for each month. Think of your spending in 2 layers. The first layer is essential spending: housing, bills, food, insurance, transport, debt payments, and the things that have to be paid regardless. The second layer is discretionary spending: holidays, eating out, hobbies, gifts, nicer cars, better clothes. The things that make life enjoyable rather than just functional. Both layers matter, but they matter differently. If investment income can cover your essentials, you have a degree of security. If it can cover both your essentials and your lifestyle spending, you have far more freedom. So start with a simple question. What would you need each month after tax? £1,000 a month is £12,000 a year. £2,000 a month is £24,000 a year, and £3,000 a month is £36,000 a year. That annual figure becomes your starting target. But there is another question people often miss. Does your portfolio need to fund your entire life, or is it topping up other income? Maybe later in life you will have a state pension. Maybe you have a defined benefit pension. Maybe you plan to work part-time. Maybe your household has 2 incomes. Every pound of reliable income you expect elsewhere reduces the amount your investments need to produce. So the real number is not always, how much do I spend? It is, how much of that spending must my portfolio cover? Now, the basic formula is genuinely simple. You take your annual income target, divide it by the dividend yield you expect from your portfolio, and that gives you a rough portfolio value. Let's use 3 illustrative yields: 3%, 4%, and 5%. If you wanted £12,000 a year, £1,000 a month, you would need, at a 3% yield, £400,000. At a 4% yield, £300,000. At a 5% yield, £240,000. For £24,000 a year, £2,000 a month, you would need £800,000 at 3%, £600,000 at 4%, or £480,000 at 5%. And for £36,000 a year, £3,000 a month, you would need £1.2 million at 3%, £900,000 at 4%, or £720,000 at 5%. That sounds simple. And at first glance, the 5% yield looks like the obvious winner. Smaller portfolio, same income, done. But chasing the highest yield is one of the most common traps in dividend investing, and it is the first major reason why the simple calculation can mislead you. A yield is a snapshot, not a promise. If a company's share price falls sharply, but it has not yet cut its dividend, its yield rises automatically. That means a company yielding 6% on a stock screener might look incredibly attractive. But that high yield could be the market telling you something is wrong. Maybe profits are falling. Maybe the balance sheet is weak. Maybe investors think the dividend cut is coming next. If a company paying a 6% yield cuts its dividend by a third, your income falls to the equivalent of a 4% yield on the price you originally paid, assuming the share price is unchanged. And in real life, the share price may have fallen as well. So you can lose on both sides, lower income and lower capital. That is why income investors should care about more than the biggest yield on a screen. You want to think about the sustainability of the dividend, whether it can grow over time, diversification across companies and countries, and your total return after tax and costs. A globally diversified high dividend fund can give you exposure to many companies rather than relying on a handful of UK shares. But even then, its yield moves around. It is not a fixed salary and should never be treated as guaranteed income. And here is the line that really matters. A dividend is not free money. When a company pays cash out to shareholders, that is cash no longer sitting inside the business. What matters is your overall return, dividend income, growth in the value of your investments, costs, and tax. Which brings us to the part that quietly destroys many dividend plans. The income you see is not always the income you keep. For the 2026/27 tax year, the UK dividend tax rates are 10.75% for basic rate taxpayers, 35.75% for higher rate taxpayers, and 39.35% for additional rate taxpayers. The basic and higher dividend tax rates both increased by 2 percentage points from 6th April 2026. There is also a £500 dividend allowance, but this is an important detail. The £500 allowance is not necessarily the only amount you can receive tax-free. If you have unused personal allowance, some dividend income may fall within that too. The tax you pay depends on your total income and the tax bands your dividends fall into. So let's use a clear example. Imagine you want £24,000 a year from dividends. That is £2,000 a month. At a 4% yield, the simple calculation says you need a £600,000 portfolio. But imagine those investments are held outside an ISA. Your salary or pension has already used your personal allowance, and you are firmly a higher rate taxpayer. You get the first £500 covered by the dividend allowance, but the remaining £23,500 could be taxed at 35.75%. That leaves you with roughly £15,600 after dividend tax. So your portfolio that appeared to pay £2,000 a month is actually delivering closer to £1,300 a month after tax. And that is before we even get to inflation. This is why you should always build your plan around the money you need to spend after tax, not simply the gross dividend income you want to receive. Now, there is some good news. Inside a stocks and shares ISA, you do not pay UK tax on dividends or capital gains. The ISA subscription limit is £20,000 for the 2026/27 tax year. So, if your investments are inside an ISA, the dividend tax problem largely disappears. But there is a wording point worth getting right here. You can only add up to £20,000 of new money into ISAs each tax year. That does not mean an ISA can only ever hold £20,000, and you can transfer existing ISA money without using new allowance. But if you have investments sitting outside an ISA, moving them inside usually has to happen gradually through the annual allowance. That is why building and protecting your ISA over many years matters so much. And pensions can also be a tax-efficient investment wrapper, although the rules around contributions and withdrawals are different, so the right approach depends on your circumstances. The main lesson is simple. The same £600,000 portfolio can produce very different usable income depending on where it is held and what other income you have. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth so far. A £600,000 portfolio may look like it pays you £2,000 a month, but outside an ISA, if you are already a higher rate taxpayer, it might leave you with closer to £1,300 a month after dividend tax. And that is before inflation. So now let's talk about the slowest and most dangerous problem of all: inflation. If you stop working at 50, your investments could need to support you for 3, 4, or even 5 decades. A fixed £24,000 a year might sound completely fine today. But with inflation averaging 2.5% a year, that same lifestyle costs about £30,700 in 10 years. After 20 years, it costs around £39,300. So a portfolio delivering a flat £24,000 dividend forever is quietly buying you less life every single year. That is why the goal should not simply be maximum income today. The goal is income that has a reasonable chance of growing over time, while your portfolio remains diversified enough to survive periods when markets struggle. Because financially, standing still is often moving backwards. Right, let's bring all of this together with 3 practical scenarios. The first is a lean financial freedom target. Let's say you want £12,000 a year from investments. At a 4% yield, the basic formula says you need £300,000. But if that £12,000 is essential to your lifestyle, you may prefer a larger target, perhaps £350,000 to £400,000. So you have more room for lower income, a cash buffer, rising costs, and unpleasant surprises. The second is a more comfortable £24,000 a year target. The simple 4% calculation gives you £600,000. But if that money has to fund a large part of your life, some investors may feel more comfortable targeting £700,000 or more rather than stopping at the bare minimum calculation. The third is full income replacement at £36,000 a year. At 4%, that points to £900,000. But if you want the portfolio to cover all your spending for decades, with no other reliable income, it may need to be materially higher once you allow for tax, inflation, cash reserves, and periods of weaker dividend income. These are not guarantees. They are not universal rules. They are simply a reminder that the exact answer from a spreadsheet is rarely the whole answer in real life. If £24,000 is your absolute minimum, and your portfolio is designed to produce exactly £24,000, you have no margin for error at all. And investing without a margin for error is stressful. But what if you do not want to wait until you have £800,000 invested? Or what if you do not want to restrict yourself only to dividend shares? This is where a lot of people can improve their plan. A portfolio does not have to fund your spending through dividends alone. It can provide money through dividends, interest, and controlled sales of investments. Selling a small part of a diversified portfolio is not automatically worse than receiving a dividend. Both are simply ways of turning investment value into spendable money. The important difference is planning. If markets fall sharply, you do not want to be forced to sell investments at depressed prices just to pay your bills. That is why a cash buffer can be useful. Holding roughly 12 to 24 months of essential spending in cash or lower risk assets may help you avoid selling investments immediately after a market fall. The right amount will depend on your own circumstances, so treat that as a planning principle, not personal advice. One more practical point. Dividends do not normally arrive monthly like a payslip. Many companies and funds pay quarterly, twice a year, or at different times of the year. So even if your portfolio produces £24,000 annually, you need a cash management plan to turn irregular payments into a reliable monthly income. That is another reason a cash buffer matters. A total return approach may also allow you to diversify more broadly rather than concentrating in a narrow group of high-yield shares. One diversified portfolio, multiple sortie return. Dividends, interest, and controlled sales, not one magic yield number. So, here is the final framework you can use. First, work out your annual after-tax spending target. Second, subtract any reliable income you expect from elsewhere, such as a defined benefit pension, state pension once you are eligible, or dependable part-time work. Third, choose a cautious income assumption, not the highest yield you can find. Fourth, account for tax, particularly if investments sit outside an ISA. Fifth, plan for inflation and make sure your strategy is not built on the idea that income will stay flat forever. And finally, add a margin for error. For example, if you need £24,000 a year, have no other income, and use a cautious 3.5% starting income rate, your rough portfolio target is about £686,000. Then you might decide to build in an additional buffer and aim for something closer to £750,000. Not because £750,000 is a magic number, but because real life is not a spreadsheet. The answer to how much do I need invested to live off dividends is never just one number. The real answer is this. You need enough capital that your lifestyle still works when dividends disappoint, prices rise, tax takes a bite, and markets have a bad year. That is the number worth building towards. If you want to get there, focus on investing consistently, not chasing the biggest yield on a screener. Work out your spending. Use tax wrappers where they make sense, diversify properly, and build enough of a buffer that your financial freedom actually feels free. Before you go, comment below. What monthly income would make you feel genuinely financially free? £1,000? £2,000? Or £3,000? And if this video changed how you think about dividend income, the next video is on how much you need saved before you can realistically start to slow down at work, which is a slightly different question, and the answer may surprise you.